Bristol Community FM 93.2.
Hello, I'm Tony Gosling, and welcome to this 2-hour talk with former steam train driver Colin Forse. Colin is in his 70s, he lives in Yatton, and has been talking to me about his life on the railways. Colin Forse is a former steam train driver. He's an author, at least in part, of 2 books. One is called A Life on the Railway, Remembering a World of Work That Has Gone Forever. That was published in 2009, written by Faith Moulin, Moulin. And the other one that Colin's contributed to is Steaming Through the Cheddar Valley, Recollections of the East Somerset and Cheddar Valley Branch Lines by Derek Phillips. And that was published by Oxford in 2001. So on now to my talk with former steam train driver and trade unionist Colin Forse.
I was born in 1933 on a Monday. My dad was a seaman and go abroad. He was a ship's carpenter. He was in his 30s. And on Friday, I was October the 2nd, it was on a Monday. On the Friday, he was given the sack with hundreds of others. There's no ships, no trade. In America, it's a depression. Here it's a recession, but it's still a depression. Nearly 4 million unemployed. Anyway, 1938 comes along, and things all of a sudden start to get better. But it's ruined by a flaming war, isn't it? 1939. Now, that started... I was going to be 6 in the October 1939, and the war started. Now, we had this wonderful war, and 1945 it's finished with. We had the VE Day, and then in Japan dropped the bombs on it. But now they can have this general election, and outside of the factory, which is gone now, Wakendean's factory, Mr. Rory Ewan is the Conservative MP for the Weston-super-Mare constituency. And as far as I know, he's doing his speech, he's saying his bit. And there was lots of men there, and a lot of them wore their old battle dress. The badges was gone, but they were... And I can see him now, one bloke saying... You're not going to do to us what you lot have done prior to this effing war. Well, first of all, laugh as you may, I went home to my dad and I told my dad what this man had said. I didn't understand effing, all right? Not a nice word, he said. He said, well, son, and then he told me now about how difficult it was that he never went to work from 1933 to 1938, 5 years unemployed. They had to give the keys up because they was buying a house at South Liberty, couldn't afford that. My mum got fined £5 because she couldn't pay the rates to Bristol Corporation, and I haven't got it. My brother has got the card where my dad had to go and do work to get certain foods, and one of them on there was margarine, not butter. We don't do that today. And that got me thinking, and I read as many books as I possibly could about politics, and then I used to ask questions, and all sorts of people in this village. There were some wealthy people, there was farmers, and if you was interested, they would talk to you and give you their version. Anyway, the National Service, that come along, and I thought, and that was a Labour government that kept that going, mate. It didn't do us any harm. In fact, it give us a whole new outlook on life. But well, then the 1950s, it's begun to got a bit better, and of course the National Health Scheme. And one of the things, I got this, 1940, I can remember not hearing anything, because I didn't live in Yatton in those days, air raid. But I could lip read, and I can remember the almoner in Bristol General Hospital asking my mother how much she could afford to pay. And my mum, I can see my mum now, and she said £half a crown. Well, bear in mind, mate, the wages was only about £3 a week, mate, or less in some cases. never been biased, but the Labour that we've had just recently is not the Labour. I can't understand why employers, they expect loyalty from their employees, but they never reciprocate. Now, that was the one good thing about working for British Rail. The top management reciprocated. We used to have, for instance, trade union schools held at Babacombe. They were subsidised, and you could take your wife, take your kids, and we went into a hotel down at Babacombe, and it was the union would always invite British Rail management. Sir Peter Parker, there was a professor, somebody that's gone to Oxford, there was Chris Green, all sorts of top management, and they would come down and tell us their problems, and then we would have a chat, really friendly, no shouting and hollering it, and then at the end of the day you had an understanding of other people's problems. But see, it's like now with this British Airways thing. I don't know about being a steward on an aeroplane. I haven't got a clue. Preferably, I don't think I would like the job, because it's too confined to my... But I don't know what their duties are. British Airways, that boss, he's not really interested in the workers and paying the wages. All he's interested in is paying his shareholders. And the shareholders are not suffering any pain at all. Well, if you're having difficulties, which the airline is, then that's the time that the workers and the bosses should cooperate, not cut one another's throats. Now, we've lost another 150 million, so they shareholders is going to lose out anyway. And then you hear this clap-tap about the number of cabin crew that have been on strike for 10 days and have lost £2 million in wages. Christ. 10 days? It's so sad. And now, with the country have said, right, Mr. Cameron and Mr. Clegg, you've got to so-called put it right. But notice now, and I'm not biased, but notice how the public spending got to be cut, but not a word about the people that cause the problem. Not a word about these big bankers. And they're the people that caused the problem in the first place. So why aren't they paying their share then? If we're going to have pain, everybody have the same pain. And that's why it's so unfair, see? And I'm afraid that whatever Mr. Cameron is going to do, he got two choices. He can either pull this country up by his boots, or at the end of 5 years he would wish he was never born.
It's Yatton, former steam train driver Colin Forse, author of A Life on the Railway, Remembering a World of Work That Has Gone Forever, from 2009. So now, back to 1950s Somerset, to Yatton and to former steam train driver Colin Forse.
I'm 76 years of age, and I worked on the British Railways from the 3rd of January 1949. I retired in March 1996. I was not 65, but First Great Western wanted to reorganise the supervisory and inspectors grades, and there was one more than what they wanted. And I was not the senior one, not in grade, but I was the oldest one, and I felt that I could go and the young man could stay. So that's what happened. I started 5:30 in the morning. I was 15 and 2 months old, and I started 5:30 in the morning in a signal box at Yatton. I didn't really want to go in a signal box, but I couldn't be an engine cleaner until I was 16. So I went in the signal box. In actual fact, looking back, it was a good experience, because I learnt a signalman's job as well. Not an expert, but I learnt it. But then I transferred and went into the locomotive department at Yatton. Yatton was a very, very busy place. The signal box itself had 129 levers and 5 blanks, so that tells you the number of signals and points. There were 13 pairs of catch points. There was the Clevedon line, which was serviced by mostly 3 trains an hour from the 5:35 in the morning to 10:35 at night, with a couple of extras on a Saturday. There was the Cheddar Valley Line, which is all the fashion now, called the Strawberry Line. I don't know why, because the strawberries was only for a couple of months, but it's the Strawberry Line. There were 6 drivers and 6 firemen, 2 cleaners and 2 shedmen. And it was a very busy place. And initially, I worked 48 hours a week in the signal box, but by the time I got into the Loco, it was 44. So what they used to do, you work 48 one week and only 40 the other, and that worked out 44 hours.
So did you actually have your locomotives stored here at Yatton, or what?
Yes, we had 3 locomotives that was actually stationed at Yatton, although they weren't permanent, because the Clevedon engine was normally a 14 class auto train. They used to be 48s before the Great Western made the oil burners, so they pinched the numbers. They were 042 side tanks, and they were little flyers with 5'8" wheels, and they'd go. They was little flyers. There was also another version which was non-auto, which was a 58, exactly the same, but it couldn't work an auto train. Well, the Great Western Railway, for as far as I know, had in the very early days what they call a steam rail motor. It was a carriage with an upright boiler, and the fireman would stay that end and the driver would go the other end in a vestibule, and they would go backwards and forwards all day long. Well, that's what they done when they made the 2 coaches, as far as Yatton was concerned, and then the engine. So the engine towed the coaches into Clevedon. There was an arrangement where the driver could work the regulator and put the brake on. He said goodbye to the fireman in Clevedon and went up the other end and drove the train out to Yatton. It was very good. And of course, if the engine wasn't available, then you had to keep running round. And I done that with my brother. We had no auto engines, and I coupled and uncoupled 37 times in a shift. And my brother done the same, and then other firemen have had to do it if there was no. So we earned our corn. The other thing was we waited for the customers. Meaning to say, the last train from Paddington, in those days, if it was delayed because of the smog and the fog, when the train got to Chippenham, either the ticket collector or the guard would ask if there was any passengers for Clevedon. And if there was more than 4, we had to wait for the train to come get to Yatton, the connection. So that meant we could be there, instead of going home at 11:10, we could still be there 12:10. 1:10 until the train, but it had to be more than 4 passengers, because they would have a taxi for 4. Look. So that was the Clevedon line. Now the Cheddar Valley Line we went to Cheddar in Wells, passenger train in the morning, then we done other duties, and then when I first started, we actually went to Blagdon on the Blagdon line, which that died in 1950, so, and Langford in Burrington.
Now, people nowadays would think of Blagdon as a place which is actually really small and wouldn't demand a railway station.
No, but now you think about it now then. Congsbury, here they are complaining and moaning about they can't get on the road. The A370 is blocked, it's terrible, and if there's a crash and the bus queues and whatnot on the bridge every night. Congsbury would have been the ideal place still to have a train service. Not Sanford and Banwell, although it's on the route, but Winscombe have grown, I don't know about Axbridge, but Cheddar is grown, and of course, a city, Wells, you can't get in, you can't get out unless you've got a car. And the bus service from Yatton to go to Wells. Now, no more than 35 minutes by road. Then you pay to go in a car park. To get there now, off the top of my head, I got to go down to Weston on a train or on one of the buses. I got to find a bus that's going to Wells, which I understand takes an hour and 20 minutes. And by the time I get there, I got to come on a bus to come all the way back, and I spend 5 hours travelling. Now, where's the logic in that? However, the thing was, it's not like how out in Holland, for instance. Every station in Holland got a train service half an hour. Every station. And when they built a new town, they built train service as well, wouldn't it? Our problem is that because when railways were being built, there was a difficulty with the landowners. It never actually got to where people were living at the time. But bearing in mind people that was quite willing to go on a pony and trap to go to the nearest station and catch a train. The motor car killed that, didn't it? Today, here they are arguing, they made Portishead. It's a huge place. They can't get on the A390. There's a 50-minute plus wait to get at Portbury. The bus route up to Bristol on the Abbottsley Road is diabolical, and here they are arguing about putting a train service back. January 1950, I got made a fireman for Bristol St Philip's Marshall Bath Road. I went to Bath Road. What really happened, didn't it? British Rail, when the British Railways, then not British Rail, just after it was nationalised, had to have a programme to replace the railway itself after the war. Now I understand, and I don't know whether it's true, but the bill for the railway, 4 railway companies, was £142 million. That was for the service provided during the war years. However, nobody got it. Well, in 1950 they decided that they would build all these standard locomotives, which shows you how good they are. They're still running today. However, at the same time, they had pressure from the oil companies to build the new diesel locomotives. And I think you'll find in the record somewhere that at the end of the day, British Rail finished up with 42 different types of diesels. We had diesel hydraulics, which was on the western region. We had diesel electrics on the LMS. We had electric locomotives on the LMS, which was the West Coast route first time round. And it went on and on and on. Anyway, eventually, Mr. Macmillan and Mr. Marples come on the scene. And Mr. Marples was the road transport man. And he could see that his company, or at least his wife's company, could get all these lovely contracts to build the new autobahn, which, as far as we're concerned, was the new motorways.
Well, that was a company called Marples Ridgeway, wasn't it?
I think so.
That's a bit naughty, isn't it, when you've got a transport secretary whose wife and himself are involved in a road building company.
However, to be perfectly honest, we had branch lines in the United Kingdom which really had outlived their day, because the very communities that they served was now beginning to become motorised, or the buses. Now, that was lovely as long as the buses was there. However, British Rail must then, with Dr. Beechin, then decided that they would do to see about closing stations and railways and whatnot. And today we're seeing the result of it now, because the end of the motor car is in sight. people are sooner or later are going to use, I don't care whether it's called public transport, but it's buses or trains or aeroplanes or ships. They'll even have pony and traps, but it won't be driving no motor cars. We know now it's coming to an end. Now, the thing is, did you just notice that all those years, British Rail come modernised, and there was a great deal of talk about, as far as ASLEF was concerned, was flexible rostering. Now, we always done flexible rostering, because one week you was on nights, next week you were on afternoon, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I understand that my union at the time was negotiating for flexible rostering, and they got an agreement with British Rail, and nice agreement, everybody was happy. It went off to number 10 Downing Street, and lo and behold, Mrs. Thatcher wouldn't accept it because she wanted to break us. She failed. I was actually a representative at that time at Bristol Bath Road. The wonderful thing about it was, when Sir Peter Parker was chairman, the management was pretty good. They were railwaymen. And any sensible railwayman realised that you're going to have somebody to run the show. Nobody's perfect, they make mistakes, but they always listened. And 9 times out of 10 there was a good agreement made, so British Rail was on the way up. Well, that was early 1980s, because I got an inspector's job in 1985. Now, one of the other interesting things was that, lo and behold, British Rail managed to get what we now know as a high-speed train. And it's a wonderful train set. 1972, we had these wonderful HSTs, and they put them in service with Paddington, Bristol and Cardiff. Now, the initial thing, all of a sudden, the older senior drivers, who were the ones that were always going to drive these because it was in their links, the mileage turns, senior drivers had senior work, and the senior work was the express trains. Well, these HSTs was express trains. So what they done initially, they made an agreement that it would be double manned if they went over 100 mile an hour. Now, why that was that nearly all the senior drivers were 63, 64 years of age. And you just don't jump from one clanky old thing and go into the ultimate of that speed, because none of them ever done 125 mile an hour before. Anyway, this is where the politics come in. They anticipated that on the Paddington to Bristol route there would be an average of a 10% increase in passenger receipts. And it was going to grow. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And it was the most popular way of travelling, HSTs. People wanted to go on HSTs. A man assaulted me because he didn't get on an HST, he got on a standard train. The people that was running the job, the intercity as it is now broke up to be, was a man called Mr. Chris Green and a man called Dr. Predo. They was the two so-called British Rail men that was in charge of. Chris Green was also a general manager of the southern region, so he was a railwayman. However, the profits, mind, what everybody wanted British Rail to make profit, was creamed off into the private sector in 1996, and First Great Western are reaping the money, and the shareholders are getting the money instead of us. And that's how disgusting it is. I say no more. No more.
But what was it like when these new high-speed trains came into service in the 70s?
They're a lovely piece of machinery. They really were. They had some faults, particularly with the brakes. They had Furdo brake linings, and when they was put on hard, they used to stink a bit. They altered it, they cured it. One of the other things was, before all this nonsense about global warming, in Notch 6, I think it was, hot weather, they tend to get higher water temperature. So what they done, they knocked out notch 6, and you can go no more than notch 5. But they cured that. And of course, since I've finished, they've changed the models of the engines itself. The last ones I had was what was called Venturias, but I don't know, they're much more modern engine again now. I started work on January the 3rd, 1949. I was 15 and 2 months old. 5:30 in a signal box as a booking boy. Now, the booking boy's duties was to keep a train register, because when they talk about health and safety today, there was no such thing as health and safety in those days, but the train registration was the most important record of all what was happening with the trains on the main line, on the branch lines. Every sort of train, the Royal Train, the expresses, the stoppers, the goods, the coal trains, the branch line trains, and the Strawberry Line trains. You had to keep a record of them all. Apart from that, there was other duties like polishing the frame, and you done that on nights. And as far as the railway was concerned, Yatton was an important junction for Clevedon and the Cheddar Valley Line. Although there was only 2 lines up and down main line actually going through the station, either side of the 2 cut-ins there were 4 tracks, so you could see how busy it was. Now, on an average, from, shall we say, 5:30 in the morning until 2 a.m. the following morning, you could roughly say there was a train passing through Yatton, either stopping or not stopping, every 5 to 12 minutes. In the summer, which I only done the 1 service, there was trains coming from Wolverhampton to Newquay, trains going from Manchester to Perranporth. There was trains going to Wadebridge. There was trains going Penzance. You name it, they were going anywhere to the southwest, particularly with the holiday trade. And one that stands out in my mind now was Hull to Paynton, Botanical Gardens. There's a lovely name for a station. So that's how busy it was. Whilst all this is going on, the Clevedon train is going in and out. The journey was 7 minutes to Clevedon. You could take your pram, and why I say that, you could put your pushchair on, and in 7 minutes was in Clevedon. Do you know, when they took away the train service, they replaced it with a bus service. And 7 women, including my wife, went to the station with a pushchair, which my eldest son was only 5 or 6 months old. And lo and behold, the driver said, "You can't go because there's no room for the pushchairs." That's service, isn't it? Anyway. Well, the Cheddar Valley Line, that kept going for a bit longer. And the freight, of course, it kept going. But eventually, they closed it. Now, in its heyday, the stations were served was Yatton to Whittam, which Whittam is on the main line, which goes from Taunton to Westbury. Congsbury, Sandford and Banwell, Winscombe, Axbridge, Cheddar, Draycote, Lodge Hill, Wookey, Wells Tucker Street, and initially, until they closed it, Wells Priory Road. And believe it or not, there was 3 stations at Wells, but before my time. Then up over the hills to Shepton Mallet, Cranmore, which people now go to for the East Somerset Railway, Wanstrow, which was a little station that served the village a mile away. And the funny thing about it was the school kids that lived in the, I think it was called Wanstrow Priory, all walked to the station to catch a train to go to school. They didn't ride in a coach, they walked. Anyway, then you got to Whittam. Now in the evening we had a train service that went right the way round what we called a circle. So all those stations that I just told you, plus now Whittam to Frome, and then we connected with the boat train from Weymouth to Paddington, and we went then from Frome Mells Road, Radstock, Farringdon Gurney, Midsummer Norton, Hallertrow, Clutton, Pensford, Whitchurch Holt, Brislington and Bristol Temple Meads. And that coach and the train went from platform number 1 to Temple Meads to Portishead with a Bristol crew on. That's the Cheddar Valley. Now then, the Cheddar Valley Line, the 6:50 in the morning, which was the first passenger, went to Wales and come back again. Then there was a 7:35. And then there was a 9:40. But not all Yatton worked mine. The Bristol men used to do it, and Westbury men used to go round. There was a service roughly every 2 hours. Even on a Sunday, there was 2 trains on a Sunday.
Now, you must have, if you work in that line, you must have seen the passenger numbers go down and down, I suppose, until what happened and when did it finally close?
Funny enough, the passenger numbers never really went down. There wasn't many in the beginning. I mean, you had the kids from Wales used to go to Cheddar and vice versa. The freight is what kept it going. And then in the strawberry days, all hell let loose for 6 weeks, with these strawberry specials. Really, when it was shut, as far as passenger service, it was gone anyway. And it would have been cheaper to give the people a car.
That sometimes you might have been running the train backwards and forwards with hardly any passengers at all.
Sometimes. The Clevedon branch was different. No, the Clevedon branch was not closed by Dr. Beechan. It was not closed by the Western Readers Management. It was closed by the Road Division of the British Transport in Whitehall. And the reason was they didn't want to pay for an overbridge like they did on the main line at Buxton with the new M5. And that's why Clevedon lost his train service.
So you're saying that the Clevedon line closed at the same time as the M5 opened?
Well, it closed a little bit before because they didn't want to build a bridge. Look, you can walk down there now where the line was, and what goes by is the motorway. And they didn't want to build a bridge, but they had to at Buxton to go over the main line, but branch line, you're shut it. When they had the meeting in the assembly rooms, believe it or not, the booking clerk, he was lucky he never got hung, drawn and quartered, but he kept 2 sets of books. And that branch line paid. And the British Railway representatives went mad, but they closed it because he shouldn't have been keeping 2 books.
So what you're saying is that he had a set of books which was the official set and another set...
He had his unofficial set which he kept of all the monies coming in and the monies going out, and the British Railway book was supposedly a true record, but it wasn't.
So this is the British Railway book was saying that it wasn't paying, was it?
Paying, which they'd done in more than one. See, the thing was, they had such a funny way of doing it. If they're doing it today, if you bought a ticket from Paddington to Clevedon, Paddington would get the credit. If you bought a ticket from Yatton to Clevedon, Yatton would get the credit. If you bought a ticket from Clevedon to Paddington, Clevedon would only get the bit from Yatton, whereas Paddington picked up the rest. Look. How they done it, this railway clearinghouse was a bit of a joke. Anyway, the passenger service disappeared on the Cheddar Valley link, but the freight still run.
My conversation with former steam train driver and trade unionist Colin Forse in his 70s, who lives in Yatton, and his book is A Life on the Railway, Colin Forse's World of Work That Has Gone Forever, and it's written by Faith Moulin, Moulin. So let's now go back to my conversation with Colin.
Right, to become a driver, there was no apprenticeship as such. When you got promoted to a fireman from a cleaner boy, you applied for a vacancy. I applied for a vacancy in Bristol, January 1950. Now, I was lucky, personally, because I had a head start. My dad worked on the railway. I'd been on steam engines. I've had a shovel of coal, and I was lucky. Anyway, the next thing is you go in what they call the junior work, which was the station pilots at Temple Meads. and it was supposed to be drivers, ASLEF drivers, not very well. They was the little 14s, they was class 55s, that's a pannier tank. Yeah, the little tankies, and you had diesel shunters in the end like that. You had whatever was available, and actually it was hard work, particularly for the drivers, because they weren't very well, and of course they got a kid with them. We're the kids. You know what kids are. I got a lovely driver. I got a man called Albert Griffiths, and he lived in Sandy Park in Brislington, and when he opened his box he had about 25 pills to take. Yeah, anyway, I worked with him until the boss had me in. I thought, oh, here we go. And he asked me if I would go and work at Yatton, because I'm not a Yatton fireman, all right? So I said, yes. He said, we will pay you the standard lodging allowance, and you could live at home. Now, the reason why was that no way they could get a fireman down to Yatton between the hours of 11 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. So there was 3 turns that had to be covered on a daily basis. So I used to do them turns, 3 o'clock in the morning to the 2 turns, generally 2 or 3 times a week. But then I would also do the 6:30 in the morning, the Clevedon trip, and then in the afternoon I would do the late trip, because the fireman couldn't go home. There's no passenger train for him to go home. And of course, economy. They won't pay a fireman for sitting on his ass, will they? Or anybody. It's money, isn't it? So that's how that happened. Now, that was the 14s, the class 55s, and then there was the Ivat tankies, and then we had the little Mickey Mouse engines. That was a tender engine. Well, we had one on the Clevedon line, was a 1463. She was special. She was green and lined, and we looked after her because she was a lovely engine. 41203 and 41202, which was an Ivat class engine. In 1959 I broke my arm, and I was working at Yatton Permanent then, and the Swindon doctor said, no way can you go back firing with your arm in that shape. So he said, have a fortnight's engine cleaning and see what happened. Well, the physiotherapy in Bristol Infirmary wouldn't do any more. They said, that's it. Well, anyway, I had a fortnight cleaning these engines, and I cleaned them, and my arm was perfect. Well, then, 1960, we were told at Yatton that back to Bristol. Didn't want no more steam. 1952, whilst I was working at Yatton, I was on the afternoon shift at the afternoon Clevedon, and it was last week because the following Thursday I was off to Aldershot to join the army, the National Service. Anyway, I gets there, and, well, however we won a war, I don't know. But anyway, everybody's shouting at one another. But very lucky, went in the Royal Engineers at Aldershot, in Malta Barracks, and we had a bit of fun there with the training and made some friends, and then we get split up, and then my best mate, who was a shunter at Yeovil, he was sent off to Egypt because they had problems there, and I went on a course for an engineer driver. Well, I could have gone on the steam, which was already there, or go on the diesel. Well, I went on the diesel course. Best thing I could do. Anyway, far superior than steam. I mean, you had to look after a steam engine. With diesel, just put the key in, press the buttons like a car, and off you go, innit? Well, that's the theory. I got myself a little job at Longmore, the military railway place, and that worked out all right. And then they said, off you go, and I went to Egypt, and I went to a place at Ismailia, and the garrison was called Moasker, and there was some engines there which was on the Egyptian State Railway. And then they sent us then from there to a place called Finaro, which was actually a dockside on the Great Bitter Lake. Now, in those days, British Army, or the Navy or the Air Force wasn't very popular in Egypt. They wanted their canal back, so there was always troubles anyway. In the Suez Canal, that was part of the agreement. I'm not sure when, but the British military people let them have it back. The Egyptian State Railway, they were running their own passenger train services. The only things that we were doing, we would shunt trains in engineer base depots, and the wagons would go up to the main line, and the Egyptian train drivers would take it away. But then General Naguib started his troubles. So initially, part of the railway was taken over again by the military, the War Department. But I didn't get involved in that. I was on a diesel shunter in a place called Geneva, which was a Royal Army Service Corps place, you know, and their stuff come in, and there was troubles, but I didn't get involved in none of that.
That was Colin Forse there talking to me earlier this year.
Bristol Community FM 93.2.
Welcome back to my conversation with Colin Forse. Colin is in his 70s and he's a former steam train driver and trade unionist from Yatton. His book is called A Life on the Railway. That is Colin Forse's Remembering a World of Work That Has Gone Forever, published in 2009 and written by Faith Moulin. That's Moulin.
I got passed as a past fireman. In other words, I could apply for a driver's vacancy. Well, me and the missus, we had ambitions to go to Plymouth. The idea was to make a boarding house. But of course, they were making men redundant at Plymouth. In fact, my understanding is that there was over 100,000 railwaymen lost their job through beaching. Nobody have ever suffered that much. The miners, nobody have ever suffered that number, 100,000. 2,385 stations were closed. And God knows how many signal boxes. Well, the signal boxes was going to follow anyway, because that's modernisation. When they took away the steam from Yatton, because of the redundancy arrangements, although there was still steam going on the Cheddar Valley Line, there was no point in me staying, so I elected to go back to Bristol, which was my original depot, and I done it through an agreement that where the new service started from, that's where I would go. So I went back to Bristol. Well, then I went into the links, which was still steam for most of them, and that was till I think 1963. And then I applied for a driver's vacancy to go up Barrow Road in Bristol. And I stayed there then until 1965, when they closed it and went back to Bristol Temple Meads, Bath Road. Well, then I went in the pilot link, shunting, and that was Malago coach sidings, Bristol Temple Meads. There was the free shifts there, two ends, Bristol West End and Bristol East End. So that was two pilots, 24 hours a day, and then up to Dr. Days, which was the big coach sidings. So that was another three. That was the pilot link. Well, most of the drivers there again were still the crippled drivers, but now they started to put us in the same links. Well, there's Wapping, down Princes Street, Wapping, where you come down through, you could go from Temple Meads, high level as it was called, down through the Redcliffe Tunnel, which went under Redcliffe Church, out past the General Hospital, across the Swing Bridge, and then across the first part of the River Avon, and then you come across Princes Street, where the new Industrial Museum is, and Wapping was a yard. From Wapping, then you could go back across the Ashton Gate Swing Bridge and back up to Bristol West Depot, or back to Temple Meads again. That's the Wapping. But then the other one, which is now built over, but the part of the building, the goods shed, was at Cannon's Marsh. That's the one that run along the Hot Wells Road and then went past the big gasworks, which has now been modernised and one thing and another, and then that went into Cannons Marsh, where that yard serviced the Irish boats. That's when Bristol had a fantastic dock system, but that died. The boats got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it's all container traffic now, so of course it's picked up somewhere else, Southampton, Felixstowe and all sorts of places. The rest of the railway, now Bristol actually had a fantastic suburban service, the Clifton Down Line. The Clifton Down Line would start from Clifton Bridge, which is down past Ashton Gate, down by the Porter's Head line. That was the Porter's Head line. There was coach sidings there, and the train services which there was up to Clifton, down to Avonmouth, and then you could go back out to Severn Beach, back up to Patchway, back out down again, down Filton, down Orfield, Ashley Hill, Stapleton Road, Lawrence Hill, Bristol Temple Meads, and the Prize Angel trains wouldn't go to Temple Meads, would whip round the corner to St Anne's and out to Keynsham. Porter's Head. Initially, Porter's Head Temple Meads. That was Portbury, Pill, Clifton Bridge, Ashton Gate, Parsons Street, Bedminster and Bristol. Do that and go round, and then go round Lawrence Hill, up the hill to Montpelier, Clifton down to Seamill, Sherhampton and Avonmouth, and go back round again. Up to Embry, and then back to Filton. There was no Bristol Parkway in those days, because that was Stoke Gifford shunting yards. Then eventually the timetabler's done Porter's Head to Bath Green Park. So you could go down to Porter's Head, stay on the same train, come back up, Temple Meads, at the Mangotsfield Bank. I'm not sure the stations at there, Fish Ponds or Staple Hill, and then I think it was Mangotsfield, and then you could go down then to, we're Bitten now, and on to Bath Midland. So that was the service they had. The Clifton Down Line was a train roughly every 20 minutes in both ways. The first one in the morning, when I said about Dr. Days, the last job that the 10 o'clock shunter at night would do, and in actual fact the train crew, the driver and fireman, would push down into number 15 platform, which is Brunel's old station, still open. 2 trains, carriages, would push them down, 15 coaches. The first lot that went in was the Weymouth train, and the second lot, all coupled up together, was the first train, 5:35 from Temple Meads to Avonmouth, double-headed. And that's 2 engines, and one engine would carry on going round Embry, and the other one would pick up a set of coaches at Avonmouth that had been there overnight and start the service the other way. Avonmouth, there was 2 yards at Avonmouth. One was called Royal Edward, which was improved during the war by the Yanks. And then there was the old yard. What was called the old yard was run with the LMS and the Middle Region and the Western for the banana traffic. You know, ships come in from Caribbean, as it is, loaded up with bananas. They was in the wagons and gone. See, you take a place now, Padstow, North Devon, Ilfracombe, Bideford, Padstow, all the way down there, Perranporth. You could catch a train at Perranporth on a Saturday and go to Bristol or go to Reading and London direct from Perranporth. There ain't no railway down there now. The only bit of railway that's left is St Ives and the Loo branch. You can't get into St Ives with a car, so you leave it on the station and go in by the train.
My conversation with former steam train driver and trade unionist Colin Forse. He's the author of A Life on the Railway. Colin Forse is remembering a world of work that has gone forever. And it's actually written by Faith Moulin. That's Moulin, and published in 2009.
What makes me angry is that the governments all of a sudden found billions of pounds to give to the private sector to run the railways. They denationalised British Rail and they gave the money, which they would never ever give British Rail. Edward Heath said to whoever it was, £600 million, which is petty cash as it is today. £600 million to do something with the railway. It wanted investment. And within 6 weeks, that money was withdrawn. That's the government, isn't it? The other thing is that, go back to Mr. Marples in his motorways. Who did they build the motorways for? It won't for the private motorist, although he could go on the motorway. What's the biggest complaint today on the motorway? Lorry after lorry after lorry after lorry. How can the post office say that for three drivers from Penzance to Plymouth, one driver from Plymouth to Bristol, and one driver from Bristol to Paddington on the post office, with the men collecting and sorting the mail inside the train, now is 10 lorries and 10 drivers from Plymouth to Bristol and 10 from Bristol to wherever. I'm very cynical in the way that civil servants act in their particular ministries, and the Department of Transport, as far as it's concerned, there would be no railway at all in this country. Not Beecham, but there was another man called Selden, I think, who, as far as he was concerned, there would only be one railway line, and that was from London to Scotland.
But don't you think, in a way, the cutting down the railways was a good thing? Because, as you were saying yourself, these trains were running backwards and forwards almost empty. And not only that, because the railways have been cut back, that's one of the reasons these little steam lines exist, like the Somerset Railway. Yeah,
one has to admit that the trains available in the 1960s were no longer needed because most people had a little motor car or a motorbike and sidecar. That was the fashion. It was far better for them to get in their car and go. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm definitely not anti-motorist. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I drive my little three-wheeler down to Cornwall once a year when I could go on the train for nothing. But what's the point? I can't go nowhere on the train when I get there. Oh no, that at that time, them particular branch lines, a lot of them went the same way as the stagecoach. They'd had their day, but the thing is that there is no competition for long distance. That's the secret, even with the freight. That's the biggest problem of all, is that lorries are going from the Midlands, are going down to the West Country, loaded, and 9 out of 10 of them are coming back empty.
Surely the same was true for the old goods wagons, that they would sometimes come back empty, wouldn't they?
Well, the only wagons that basically would actually come back empty was coal wagons. We used to work a freight train called the Drump Lane. A freight train which left, shall we say, Temple Meads, 9:55 at night, what they called 9:55 West Depot in Hackney. That was down to Newton Abbot. And there was another one at 10:55. There's two. These trains consisted of generally vans, and you name it, it was in there, from dustbins to brushes and parcels. It was ridiculous, really, what actually went in them. But those particular vans, they were vice versa, because all they done, they probably go down to Penzance and come back with the cauliflowers in. There were trains that obviously you can't fill them up every time. Most people that travel, I've noticed it, like Yatton. The car park in the morning, you go down in the morning, and the car park initially started off with half a dozen. Now there's nearly 200. You go down the road and there's another 100 parked down there because they don't want to pay the £2. So that's good. People are actually, they're using the trains, they're commuting. That's how it should be. I'm not saying that anybody that feels like driving their motor car from the Midlands down to Cornwall and Devon, let them get on with it. I mean, that's all right, because the railway today is not geared up to run summer trains. I mean, they don't run all these specials. Do you know, when I was a fireman, take Friday nights, we used to work a train, extra train, sometimes empty stock, which was going to go to Manchester, Liverpool, Preston, for trains to come back down, and we would work a train, say for instance, the 12 o'clock, midnight, Penzance, Manchester to Penzance. The normal one would leave Manchester at midnight, would arrive in Temple Meads at 5:35 in the morning, and then would progress at 6:35 to Penzance, right? Now then, it's summer Saturday, peak. There could be another 12 o'clock midnight, which would run 10 minutes before that one. But he would not spend an hour at Temple Meads. Or it could run 10 minutes later, so you could have 3 parts. Some of the trains that went from Paddington down to the west of England, to Torquay, Paignton, Kingswear, and of course Plymouth, Penzance, they used to run in 3 or 4 different parts. The night sleeper used to be doubled, particularly when Harold Wilson, because he used to go down, and the boat would wait for him to go to the Scilly Isles, but he loved it over there. Well, no, I think the railway got a good future, but what annoys me is that taxpayers not getting the benefit of it. That's what annoys me.
My conversation with former steam train driver and trade unionist Colin Forse, who is in his 70s and lives in Yatton. His books are A Life on the Railway, A World of Work That Has Gone Forever, by Faith Moulin, Moulin, published in 2009, and he's also included in Steaming Through the Cheddar Valley, Recollections of the East Somerset and Cheddar Valley branch lines by Derek Phillips, which was published in 2001. So, back to Colin.
The camaraderie between railway workers, there was always a bit of a joke about the man at the back of the train, which was the guard. He had his job to do and he'd done it. If you were lucky, driver and fireman, 99.9 of them, you were mates and you worked together. You become a very small team of 2. I was very fortunate. I had lovely drivers except one, and he wasn't a very nice man. Not only not to me, but he wasn't a very nice man at all. I only knew Sigamon by name because I worked in the signal box, all right? But otherwise, most Sigamon, when a train went by, they'd wave out to you or whatever. If you stopped at somewhere in the middle of nowhere and they said, got any coal? Give them a bucket of coal, you know, that sort of thing. Of course, the fireman had dealings with the signalman more so than the driver, because if you was going to carry out what was called Rule 55, that's the protection of trains stopped it, detained at a signal. Now, in the old days, before there was track circuiting or telephone communication, when a train was stopped at a signal, blow the whistle. If it didn't pull off within 2 minutes, then the fireman had to walk to the signal box and he present himself to the signalman, and he would carry out what was called Rule 55. And Rule 55 was that you would sign the train registrar's book, that you would blah, 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 train so-and-so and so-and-so. You would ask the signalman if the train was protected, and he would show you, right? And then he'd say, there's no need to stay here, mate, go back on your engine, I'll have the road in a minute. Now, how did that rule come about? Well, many, many years ago, there was this terrible snowstorm, and an engine had banked up a train up an incline, and it's going towards London. Well, the turntable was some distance from the signal box, so they turned the thing and went back down now, and they're going back down the bottom of the bank. But while all that was going on, a train was already going on that section of line. So they had to wait until the signal box ahead said that now that the train is passed, I've seen the tail light, the line is now clear, and then the signalman would be pulled the signal off, all right? He can't do it until he got his electrical set up. Anyway, this particular night, they banked up the train, they turned the train on, engine on the turntable, and the signalman had gone down to the signal. Well, it got worse and worse and worse, and the signal is, they can't see the signal now. And whatever happened, the story goes that the signalman must have forgot that he had an engine down there. Well, he gave the line clear to the signal box in the rear for the mail, the Irish mail, as it was in their days, and he could pull the signals off. He asked the signal box in advance for the signal, and he never got line clear, all right? So what he now done, instead of slowing the train down, he left these two signals clear so that he would pull the one off and the train driver would drift down to the next one. But because it was snowing, he would stop outside the signal box. Well, he didn't, and he smashed into the one in front. So that's how Rule 55 come about. So communication basically between train crew was fireman and a signalman. Other than that, plate layers, who's just, it's just, hello, all right, wave hand. But we were train crew. I mean, we had some good guards. We had a double home turn, what's called a double home turn. Laugh. You book on at 2:20 in the morning, and you're going to go to Plymouth with a parcel train. It takes you 6 hours to get to Plymouth. Sometimes it'll take you 9 hours. Anyway, when you get to Plymouth, they take the engine off of you and you catch the bus and go back to the Lyra Lodge. And there you had a bath or a shower and something to eat or go to bed, do what you like. And then you would work back at night, 11:30, drum to Bristol West Depot. Go to bed about 1:30, get up at 5:30, have a bit to eat and go up the Lyra Lynn and have a drink and then go over and get the engine and then eventually on your way home. It was just over 24 hours. I used to go out on a motorbike out here, about 10 to 2, and 24 hours later, about 10 to 3, I come back home. And you do that 3 days 1 week and 2 days the other. Always a bit of a laugh, bit of a leg pull. One of the things was with a passenger. We were double manned from Bristol to Paddington. HST. I'd already been down to Taunton on my own, all right? But because we're going to do 125 mile, it was double manned from Bristol to Paddington. And then I would be the other second man from Paddington back to Bristol, and the driver would finish the turn off, go down to Taunton and come back on his own. No problem. Anyway, whilst we're in the mess room at Paddington on number 1 platform, because they don't always know your names, but they know where you come from, they'd address you, your depot. So the foreman come in, he said, Bristol, number 1, it's me. He said, do us a favour. I said, what's that? He said, will you work a train down now to Bristol? I said, yeah, all right. He said, I'll swap the mates over. It don't make no difference with the pay or nothing like that. He said that it's a class 47 and 8 coaches. He said that Reading, Didcot, Swindon, Chipping and Bath and Bristol. I said, yeah, all right. Anyway, I finished my food and out I went, and eventually the engine come back, the shunter coupled up, the guard said at 8. He said, don't forget, stop at Didcot, Swindon. I said, yeah, all right. Anyway, off we go. Nice day. Runs into Didcot, got the window down because I'm going to look out and see the guard give right away. And this bloke comes up and starts prodding me with an umbrella. And here too. So I shut the window up. So I leave it to your imagination what happened to the umbrella. So then I opened the door and I was going to thump him one. I thought, well, I better not. Anyway, the foreman on the station come up and he said, what's up then? And this bloke's doing a war dance, saying he paid a ticket to have a HST, not an ordinary train. And the foreman said, you haven't paid any more, any less. This is an extra train. If you choose to get on at Paddington on an extra train, that's entirely up to you. He said the HST is not running. So I knew what they'd done. They swapped the trains over, see? So my mate ain't going to go to Taunton because they've had a problem, all right? They put the train on to Cardiff. That's what they'd done. Anyway, he hurt. Anyway, the copper come up, British Transport Police, and he said, what's the matter? So this bloke, I'm going to go at the copper, and I said, never mind what's the matter. I said, look. Well, he said, you do that? I said, yeah. And then he starts on about his umbrella, and I said, right, put a stop to that. I said, shut the day. He said, right, sir, name of the... He got fined for sorting a drive. Oh, dear, oh, dear.
Conversations with former steam train driver and trade unionist Colin Forse. Colin's in his 70s. He lives in Yatton, and he's author of a book called A Life on the Railway. Colin remembers a world of work that's gone forever. This was published in 2009 and actually written by Faith Moulin, Moulin. So back to Colin.
Right then, listen. Monday morning, January the 3rd, 1963, winter time, isn't it? On Boxing Day, approximately 2:30, it started to snow. In my understanding, it was still snowing in March. It was a very, very bad winter, particularly for the southwest of England. Anyway, I'm under what they call controls orders, and they wanted to know would I work the Wells goods train from Bristol West Depot to Wells, and I said yes. And he gave me a fireman whose name was Clive Gosling. Well, we go down to West Depot, we couple up, and we got a train, and we got some wagons to put off at Yatton. We got some wagons to put off at Congsbury. That was for the Rinkton branch. And then the rest was actually for Wells, East Somerset. Well, anyway, we done all that, and it wasn't too bad, although it was snowing, it wasn't too bad. And when we was going to onto the shed, there was a steam engine which was going to be the 7 o'clock Wells to Yatton, and the fireman was on there, and next thing, he jumps off the engine and he's chasing a bloke up the sidings. Well, it turns out that I caught up with my engine, a fireman who had rode his bike from somewhere or other in the snow, and I caught him up with my engine.
He was riding his motorbike along the railway?
Well, yeah, through the wicket gate and going towards the shed, see? Because you couldn't see where the railway line was, basically, and we were just creeping in. He wasn't riding it, he was pushing it. Well, we got the doctor when we caught him, but he was lucky we didn't do any injuries to him. And the only thing that was wrong with his little banter motorbike is he broke a wire for the tail light, but he was lucky. Anyway, we come back home then. Well, it carried on, didn't it? It snowed and it snowed. Anyway, when I gets to Bristol Tuesday morning, the control says, will I work the World's Goods done? And the Wells Goods, I said, no way. I said, I'm sorry. He said, why not? I said, well, he ain't never going to get there. I said, it's snowed up down Yatton now. I said, God knows what it's like out on the Cheddar Valley Line. All right, he said, well, do us a favour, he said. Will you take the engine down? That was 4-6, whatever it was. Anyway, with Clive Gosling again. Well, when we come down, we stopped at Yatton. I thought, right, we'll have water again with light engine. And what we were going to do, we were going to go and see how far we could get. Right? Not with the snowplow. There's no snowplow on my engine. Well, anyway, my mate, who's dead and gone now, come up and he said, I can't get to Congsbury. So the signalman said, don't worry, he said, we'll give you a token, he said, and you can drift round there and see what you can do. So anyway, I thought, I'll ask the signalman for what's called a steam lance, and you could put it on the front of the engine and blow the snow out of the points. So while we get to Congsbury, because the road is set now for the Rington branch, as per instructions, all right? So if anybody stole a train, they couldn't go to up the Cheddar Valley Line, they'd finish going round the Rington line, which no harm done. Well, anyway, it took some time for us to clear the point, and meanwhile, Bob had cooked a bit of breakfast for us. So anyway, well, eventually now we're going to go to the next station, Sandford in Banwell, where the phone goes, and we're told to stay where we are because there's an engine coming down now with a snowplough on. Anyway, fair enough, down he come, and there's this inspector man now, come from Stourbridge. I didn't know him anyway. He said, what y'all gonna do? He said, we're gonna couple up, he said, and we'll go as far as we can, and when we blow the hooter, he said, open up, we'll go through the snow. Anyway, I knew already that the only bad place would be Winscombe. It blew off the platform and it filled it up. Anyway, that's a laugh. Clive was having a little drive, and we're going through, and he blew up through. So he said, go on, open her up then, Clive. So he opened her up a bit more. Anyway, he said, come in, look at this, he said. And there's a bloke stood on the platform with a bowler hat and a briefcase. And all the snow is coming down, looked like a snowman on the advert, Mother's Pride or whatever it was. And he was disgusted. He was waiting for the train, because he was still running on the Cheddar Valley Line. Well, anyway, when we got to Cheddar, the signalman there shouted out to me. He said, it ain't no good up by the chicken farm, mind. He said, up by the distance for Draycote, he said, it's pretty prick. There was a small bank, and the top of it was a chicken farm. And then the snow come down off the Mendip, fill up a chicken farm, and when it done that, it would come down, cross the railway, drop down the next bit, and it covered up a part of the River Axe, a tributary of the River Axe, which is flowing water underneath. Anyway, I says to this bloke, I said, what I'd do if I was you, Governor, when you get before you get to the bridge by the chicken farm, I said, if I was you, I'd stop. We'll unhook and you have a bash on your own, and if you get stuck, we'll come in and put you. Oh, no, he said, 2 engines. You don't argue with him, do you? Anyway,
that was the inspector, was it?
Yeah. Anyway, we went through and bloody wallop, bang, come to a stand. Just like hitting a brick wall. Anyway, we come to a stand, and he gets off, doesn't he? But he gets off the wrong side. So where does he go? Straight down, and all you could see was his brown gloves and his trilby hat. So we had to dig him out. And we dug him out, and he, oh, you know that, he said. I said, well, you didn't listen, did you? I said, now what are we going to do? And it took us 2 hours to unhook that engine. We had to set fire to the coupling to melt the ice. Paraffin rag and set fire to it. Eventually, then he said, go back. I said, yeah, nice and steady. But no, he said, go back as far as you can. I said, yeah. And what happens? The snow piles up because it has snowed and blizzard, piled up behind this tender, and there we are stuck now. So that's why they 2 engines is apart. Well, the novelty is now wore off, hasn't it? Midday, mind, and this blizzard is blowing, and now he says to my fireman, you got to walk back to Cheddar with the token to carry out the rule. And I said, no way, mate, he ain't walking back to Cheddar. I'll walk back to Cheddar. And no, he won't gonna have that. Anyway, the signalman now that was going to go to Cheddar lived on Draycote Station, and he come in, he said, I'll walk back because I'm going to relieve my mate. So he went back with the inspector, not my fireman, and they took the token. So, see, that's carrying out the rule, because you couldn't have two trains in the same section without a token. You mustn't. And yeah, it's criminal. Well, anyway, it's 4:30 now. It's got dark, but it ain't dark with the snow and the ice. Now, what me and my mate had done, we pulled the smoke plate out, built a fire on the smoke plate, filled it up, and we got an igloo now, and we're in there, and we're quite comfortable. But now we got to go and find something to eat, haven't we? So we go to the pub, and we took a shovel, fireman's shovel with us, and a packer shovel, but we couldn't get the phone box. No way could we get in the phone box. It's frozen solid. Anyway, we go in the pub, and she said, I haven't got no food. Got nothing. No dear. Anyway, we go back now, we sit back on the engine, and this kid comes up, and he said, here, my mum said, if she'll cook you a chicken in summer, if you give her a bag of coal. So we done a roaring tray with a bag of coal, didn't we? Now then, we slept all night, on and off, and the next day, nothing. Several engines have come and had a go because they was running out of water. There's no water column, see, between Yatton and Wells, so they had to watch the water, see. Whilst all this was going on, the farmer with the chicken farm, he come down and made us our way down, and he said, he said, my missus said you better come up here and have something to eat and get warm. You can't stay there no more. Anyway, that was 4 of us. The driver and fireman on the first one, and me and my mate on the second one. Anyway, we walk. The house is covered in snow, and we go in, caps off, and biggest table you'd ever seen. Cups and saucers like soup dishes, covered with sandwiches and whatnot. And we stood there, and she said, where's the rest of you? Well, there's only 4 of us. No, it just said on the home service that there's 100 men digging you out. But that turned out the 100 men was on the S&D. Anyway, we had a sandwich and a cup of tea and a warm and whatnot. And then, anyway, we went back on the engine. We were all right. I mean, I had Oxos in my bag, so I got some water and had Oxos and whatnot. Anyway, then we go down midnight. There's this diesel, and he's going backwards and forwards. Well, eventually I thought, he ain't never going to get. He was pushing the snow up underneath the bridge, see, and it was freezing at the same time. Anyway, I goes down and I'm stood on the rail, and I said to this inspector bloke, I said, here, Governor, I said, how long's the sandboxes been up there? I can't reach them. And he looked, and he said, where are you stood? I said, on the rail. Oh my God, he said, he's off the road. And what he was doing, he was riding on the ice. The sandboxes was actually riding on the ice. So that was it, abandoned. There's a gap between the rails and the wheels, all right? And of course you don't steer them, it's the rails that steers them. Anyway, the inspector said, shut it down, finish. So he made the driver, well, as it says in the book, he drained the radiators, he shut it down completely. And then they arranged now for the breakdown train to come. Well, first of all, they got an engine to come behind and stop behind this Hymek. And he said, us 4, 3 plate layers that had walked from Cheddar, we're all going to go back now and go home. So tender first, so that's tender first, in the snow, still snowing, and eventually we get round to Yatton station. I give my fireman the work ticket and said, book off what time you get there, I'm going home.
That's Colin Forse there talking to me earlier this year about his experiences in the winter of 1963 down on the Strawberry Line. And Colin is the author of A Life on the Railway. Colin Forse remembers a world of work that has gone forever, published in 2009 and actually written by Faith Moulin, Moulin. So let's have the final part of my chat with Colin now.
It was the official opening to be held of Bath Road Shed. I was officially booked on to work as a fireman at 11:35 train to Swindon and work a parcel train back, which generally got lost. In other words, you're going to make a lot of overtime. So 11:35 should be off at 7:35 at night, but 9 times out of 10 it would be 9:35, sometimes 10 o'clock, because this train come from Leicester, and they had their problems anyway. The roster clerk left a note for me to go into his office, and I goes into his office and he said, "You will present yourself at 9 o'clock next Tuesday." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You will be introduced to Mr. Marples." I said, he said, "and then you will take up your book working." So I says, "No way." "What do you mean?" he said. I said, "I don't wish to be introduced to Mr. Marples, but I'm very political like that, mate." I said, "and as far as I'm concerned, I will book on and do my normal turn of duty, or I will come at 9 o'clock, I will go in the cabin until the foreman gives me a job."
So what was the problem with Mr. Marples then?
Now come on, mate. Put 2 and 2 together. What, after what that merchant had done to the railway? And you want me to shake his hand? More like wring his neck. Anyway, it's a good job I didn't, because when he was introduced to the driver that was on the long hours the same as me, I was on duty with my mate 37 hours. Hughie Arlett was on duty 30 hours, because I'd come on a bit earlier than him in the morning. And when Marples come up to him, he was introduced a driver to him that he was over 30 hours stuck in the snow, and Marples said, "Well," he said, "you got paid for it." Well, if he'd have said I've got paid for it, I'd have smacked in the nose. But I don't like the tourists. You might as well go home if you don't like it. I don't like them. It was their transport policies. I mean, it was a Tory government. I mean, Tory governments, whether you like it or not, are no good to working people. And you lot now are going to find out tomorrow, isn't it? Or is it today? Thursday, isn't it? You lot's going to find out. Can't hurt me. I'm 77 now. Do what he likes now.
That was Colin Forse there from Yatton. He's a former steam train driver and ASLEF trade union representative, now in his 70s, as he just said. Colin's books there's 2 of them. First one, A Life on the Railway, Remembering a World of Work That Has Gone Forever. That was published in 2009 and written by Faith Moulin, Moulin. The other one is called Steaming Through the Cheddar Valley, Recollections of the East Somerset and Cheddar Valley branch lines by Derek Phillips. That was published in 2001.